So far we've seen one way to set up our equation when we're working with graphing, and that was where we had the y by itself and then we had a number times our x plus a constant. So we're going to change this around and talk about a different form. We could think about this form as 1 times y equals ax plus c. So we're going to change this form of the equation to what's called standard form. Standard form of an equation is where the term with your x is added to the term with your y on the left-hand side, and then the constant is by itself on the right-hand side. In the standard form of an equation, ax plus by equals c, a, b, and c are all constants, or specifically a is a coefficient, b is a coefficient, and c is a constant. In this first example, we have negative 2x plus 4y equals negative 6. So in this example, our a in our equation is what? Negative 2, right? That's the coefficient of x. Our b is the coefficient of y, and what is that? 4. And then our c is our constant by itself on the right-hand side. So what is that? Negative 6. In our next example, we have negative 5x plus 3y equals 12. So what's our a? A is the coefficient of x, so it's negative 5, right? What is our b? It's the coefficient of y, so it's 3. And what is c? C is the constant by itself on the right-hand side, so it's 12. So I'd like you to try naming a, b, and c in these equations. And you might have to think about a couple of them. They could be a little tricky. In this first example, I need to change subtraction to addition before I can tell what my coefficient of y is. So once I do that, I can clearly see that a equals negative 2, b equals negative 3, and c equals negative 9. In my next equation, this one's a little tricky. In order for me to see what my variable x, what its coefficient is, I need to write this completely out in standard form. If you have a term missing, that means that there's a 0 involved. So since we don't have the term where x exists, that means the coefficient of x is 0. So to write this out in standard form, we could write 0x plus 4y equals 9. Therefore, a is 0, b is 4, and c is 9. The same idea applies in this next problem. Our y term is missing, which means that there is a 0 as the coefficient of y. So if I write this equation out in standard form, it's negative 7x plus 0y equals 11. So a is negative 7, that's my coefficient of x, b is 0, the coefficient of y, and c is 11, my constant. In my last equation, this one's pretty straightforward. A is 5 rather, b is negative 8, and c is 0. I wanted to give you an example where the constant could be 0, where my coefficient of y could be 0, and where my coefficient of x could be 0. We could also have an example where the constant is 0 if we just didn't have anything written in except the negative 5x and the negative 8y. Let's say, for example, this was given as negative 5x equals 8y. This is the exact same equation as we see above. If I rewrite this, I get negative 5x plus negative 8y equals 0. Those are the same exact equations. So here's an example where our constant may be 0, and we can see that once we write this in standard form. The next thing we need to be able to do is take any equation and write it in standard form. And this is going to require the same steps as what we understood when we solved for y in terms of x, only we're moving our x term to the left-hand side. So let's look at this first example. What do you think we'd do first here? We're going to add negative 2x to both sides because we want to bring the term with the x over to the left-hand side and get rid of it on the right-hand side. And since the 2x and the 3 are being added, we're dealing with addition, so we're going to work with our opposite property. So 2x and negative 2x cancel to equal 0. And on the left-hand side, we're left with negative 2x plus y equals 3. So tell me, what is a in this equation? The coefficient of x, negative 2, right? What is b? The coefficient of y, 1. Remember, there's an understood 1 if you don't see a coefficient. And then what is c? The constant, 3. Try this next problem and check back. You should end up with negative 6x plus 5y equals negative 4. Now let's try the next problem. In this problem, you should end up with 2x plus negative 5y equals 10. Go ahead and try the following problem. You should end up with 0x plus negative 3y equals 9. Remember, if a term is missing, then there's a 0 involved. Try this next problem. In this equation, once you bring over all the x terms and y terms to the left-hand side, you realize that there is no constant on the right-hand side. So you have negative 2x plus 12y equals 0.